Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to dive into a bunch of Sly Flourish news going on right now. Homie and the Dude have released the Scorched Basin Kickstarter. The new Northlands Kickstarter from Kobold Press was just announced. I'm going to talk about some of the feedback I got talking about the Daggerheart initiative system. Lots of you are playing other games. I did a poll recently, and we're going to look at some of the results of that poll. Today's GM tip is crafting magic items in 5e, and we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. So this past week, I put out the article, The Secret of the 8 Steps of Lazy GMing. You can find a link to this down in the show notes. The best way to get articles like this is by subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You can find a link to subscribe to the newsletter below. And I did a readings and reflections on this. This is a dedicated podcast for hero tier subscribers for the Sly Flourish Patreon, where I read the article out loud myself and then talk about some of the background and some of the details of the article, some other ideas that I had, sort of a director's cut, a director's commentary of Sly Flourish articles. Next week's article is Lazy Map Annotations, where I talk about, it's funny because I had the one like say the laziest version, and I'm like, I think I have one that's even lazier. So I talk about lazy map annotations. Again, you can get this article sent directly to your inbox by subscribing to the newsletter, and you can hear me read it aloud and talk about some of the background behind this in readings and reflections, which I will be recording and releasing this coming Thursday. That's to hero tier backers of the Sly Flourish Patreon. We have some new merchandise available on the Sly Flourish bookstore. On the bookstore, my wonderful wife, Michelle, and my partner, Michelle, she created some new fun things. The first one, and I'll give a little insider baseball on this one. I was like, we don't need a hat. Like a hat, who wants a hat? And then she made one, and she ordered it, and I got it, and now I wear it all the time. I love my Sly Flourish hat. It is a really, really cool, fun ball cap. I love it a lot. It's got a really cool Sly Flourish logo. I think she ordered 2 more because I need one to keep in my car when I'm out and about and I want to take walks. So really fun. I love this. I love this hat. It is really, really cool. The other one is we have a new mug. So we're rotating the mugs. We still have the mug of random names, which has the Sly Flourish logo on one side that faces your players, and then the side that, if you're holding it, has a whole bunch of different random names on it. That's our mug of random names. It's really fun. And we have a new mug called the 8 Steps. So in a similar vein, if you need to be reminded about what the 8 Steps for Lazy GMing, this picture, by the way, is one that my wife took. We have a new mug that has the 8 steps on one side and the 8 steps of the Lazy GM on the other side. That new mug is available. And the big one that we have is the 2026 Sly Flourish wall calendar is now available. We have both a US and Canada one and a rest of world, Europe and rest of world one. Make sure you order it from your region. We had some tricky bits with the store trying to separate people out, because when you show up at the store, we don't necessarily know exactly where you're showing up from. So there's not a really good way. So you want to make sure to order the calendar from the region that you're in, because they're actually different calendars printed from different outfits. So if you order at the wrong place, you're not going to get it. And we're going to have to go through a whole process of getting you refunded and everything like that. So don't do that. But we went through it. Michelle and I went through it this past couple of weeks. Each calendar, we have a picture of art from one of our books. We got the permission from all the artists to do so. And we have a GM tip for every month. So you can enjoy the artwork for the calendar, and you can enjoy a GM tip to help inspire you for our games. So I'll talk about this again later on as we get closer to the end of the year, but we wanted to make sure to have a calendar ready to go. So when as you get closer to 2026, you have a calendar. So that's some of the new cool Sly Flourish merch that you can pick up, along with our t-shirts. We really like our Lazy GM t-shirts with artwork from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master on it, and the random book of names. We don't want to overdo it with the merch, so those are the 5 things that we have. And of course, you can pick up any of the other books that we have on the Sly Flourish bookstore. That's our merch. Next week on the Sly Flourish Patreon, I am going to be releasing City of Arches Key of Worlds 15. So the Vault of the Key of Worlds is the 15th and final scenario of the Key of Worlds campaign arc that is inside the book City of Arches. So City of Arches has 3 different campaign paths that you can choose from or use or follow or mix and match with other stuff or take components of to build your own game. And for the past year or so, I've been releasing smaller supplements to expand upon each of the sections of that campaign arc. And the final one is the Vault of the Key of Worlds, where the characters finally make it into the vault that holds the key and battle the demons and devils who are warring with themselves and warring with whatever remaining cultists are there and the characters, as everyone is trying to get this last final key, a key that can open any archway in the city to any world beyond. In the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. In the right hands, it could be a powerful weapon of good. Will you decide? My own characters destroyed it with a disintegrate spell. They immediately said, like, no one should ever have this. We don't want to have it. We don't want anyone to have it. And I think it was being held by a villain, and they hit the villain and the key with a disintegrate and destroyed them both. So it was quite climactic. Short scenario, 4 pages. Dyson Logos map, one of Dyson's commercially available maps for it. And when you get it, you get a VTT version of that map that you can drop into a VTT. You have to scale it and stuff like that. It's not perfectly matched. I also, since this was the final one, I put together a package that is going to be announced on Patreon as well. This is all, so you're going to find this if you are a patron of Sly Flourish. This is for hero tier patrons of Sly Flourish. Hero tier patrons will get an announcement of this on Wednesday that will include not only a link to this final scenario, but a link to a zip file that has all 15 scenarios in it. So that way, if you want to have one that just has the entire campaign arc, all 15 scenarios ready to go, one zip file, I think it's like 100 megs. It's pretty good size. You download that and it has all the scenarios in PDF, each directory, each scenario in its own directory with a PDF and with the maps that you need to run it on a virtual tabletop. So that's really fun. What do I have planned next for this? I have a few other standalone City of Arches supplements that I'll be releasing probably every couple of weeks for hero tier patrons. And then I'm going to be moving west. We're going to stay in the general region of the City of Arches and its outside areas, but I'm going to start traveling. I'm going to get in a caravan. I'm going to shake hands, have a good coffee at the coffee shop, maybe have a final bath in the big public baths, say goodbye for a time to Garland, Willamane and company, and we're going to travel into the dangerous West. And I'm going to start working on some supplements there. So we're going to do that. So that's kind of the next... probably, when's that going to start? Probably later in the year. Probably be the first time that we really see stuff from that. In the meantime, I've got about 5 or so more supplements that are going to be coming out that are focused on the City of Arches itself. Convention season is starting up for me. I don't go to a lot of conventions. I used to go to 4 conventions a year. Now I'm kind of down to 2 or 3. I think this year we'll be going to 3 conventions. I don't know how many conventions we're going to next year, but 2 conventions that I'm going to. One upcoming is Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin, October 16th through the 19th. So about 6 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, Michelle and I will be going to Gamehole Con. I'm running a couple of games there. I've got a couple different Shadowdark games that I'm running there, and I have a couple of panels that I'm going to be on, and then I'll be playing in a whole bunch of games, and I'll be hanging out at the convention. It is a wonderful convention. I really, really loved Gamehole Con last time I went there. It was the first time that I went there. Really enjoyable time. A lot of fun games, wonderful people, really, really good time. So I'm very excited to go to Gamehole Con. Yeah, Snack Daniels here in chat says excited. Snack Daniels played, I guess, did we play at Gamehole Con or did we play at Winter Fantasy this past year? I think or both. I think it was Winter Fantasy, right? Or did we do both? I can't remember. It's a good time though. The other one that I'm going to is PAGE, the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. This one's taking place January 15th through the 18th in Philadelphia. I will be going there as well. I will be running games. I will be on some panels and I'll be hanging out. Very fun convention. Awesome people. Awesome times. I really enjoyed it. So both Michelle and I will be going to that as well. You can still get tickets and games and sign up for games at both those conventions. So check them out. Really good time. I'm not sure what other conventions I'll be going to in the immediate future. Those 2 are really, really fun, and they give me a lot of the joy of the kind of things that I want to do at conventions. I had mentioned Dungeon Master's Diaries, a wonderful podcast, Dungeon Master Diaries, that I've been listening to. And last week I mentioned one where they were talking a lot about running online games. So I was on Dungeon Master Diaries, and they released the episode on Dungeon Master Diaries where we talked about 5e and the OSR. no controversy there. So if you want to hear me talking with Matt and Jody about 5th edition D&D and OSR and Shadowdark and all that kind of stuff, you can check out that episode. It was really fun to do, really good time, and you can find a link to that down in the show notes. So it was a really fun episode as well. So we have a couple Kickstarters we're going to look at today. The first is the Homie and the Dude Scorched Basin Kickstarter. Scorched Basin is a system-agnostic desert TTRPG setting. It is a kind of very cool, very stylized artwork. I did check, no AI art used in this product, and it is a 300-page source book for kind of a Dune/Mad Max kind of wastelandy sort of TTRPG setting. Hostile terrains, brutal weather, savage tribes who are operating in the basin, all kinds of stuff. I think it's a really neat idea to build a source book that is system agnostic. They describe here that it can be played with any version of 5e, Shadowdark, Morkborg, Call of Cthulhu, Cypher system, etc., that you can play it with any of these. And this is an interesting contrast to the next Kickstarter I'm going to talk about, which is Northlands by Kobold Press, where Northlands focuses pretty heavily on mechanical material, and this one does not. And I think I actually prefer the source books that don't, because I feel like I get more value out of them. I don't really need a lot of extra mechanics these days. The source books themselves have a lot of the extra mechanics. So I'm actually all in on the idea of a source book that is just focused on flavor, and I can always bring my mechanics to it, right? I don't know if I'm not unique in that. I would not be surprised if I was in the minority of people who are like, no, I really want more spells, more monsters, more magic items, more character options whenever I'm buying a specific setting. There's an advantage to that, and I'll talk about that when I talk about Northlands. But I do feel like I get a lot of extra value, particularly long term. Like I might switch systems, I might try different things, but it's really fun to go back and take components from these old games. The Midgard World Book itself is an example of one that's very system agnostic. It was actually written for 3rd edition, I think it was for Pathfinder, but they've upgraded it to 5th edition and things like that. And I didn't need a lot of extra stuff for it because that book is so rich with lore. That's what I really wanted to focus on. There is a single-click downloadable sample, a 28-page sample of the Scorched Basin book, so you can get an idea of kind of the cool art and lore that's going on here, and the style of the writing and the page design. Really cool stuff. As always, I highly recommend that you don't just take my word for, let's see, there we go, get it the right size. You don't just take my word for a Kickstarter being a good deal or not, that you should do your own homework. And by doing your homework is looking at the sample, reading it, saying, yes, this is the kind of thing I want to back. Maybe you back the PDF version, maybe you back a physical version, but you can take a look at it and decide, is this the kind of product that you want? I think it looks really cool. I really like the style of this very much. So looks like a very neat product. So that is the Scorched Basin Kickstarter from Homie and the Dude, friends of Sly Flourish, Homie and the Dude, who have done a few different projects in the past that I've talked about. So looks really, really cool. You can find a link to that down in the show notes. Northlands. The Northlands Kickstarter is a new Midgard-focused source book and book of adventures for both Tales of the Valiant and D&D 2024. You actually pick the version. This is set in Midgard. Midgard is the kind of house setting of Kobold Press. I love Midgard a lot. I have run now 2 major campaigns in Midgard and a bunch of one-shots in Midgard. Now, I guess I've run more than that. I ran maybe a 3rd campaign. I ran a Tales of the Old Margrave campaign. That was a little bit shorter, though. And I love the Midgard setting a lot. It's really, really fun. It's a huge setting. It's got lots of lore. My Dragon Empire campaign that I'm running, I'm really in love with. It's so rich and fun, and from a theme and a story, really enjoyable. So I like that a lot. And I have run the Empire of the Ghouls campaign adventure. You can find a review where I talk about running my Empire of the Ghouls game. And Empire of the Ghouls actually spans from north to south and central Midgard. It kind of takes a big column of the center of it, and it includes a lot of Northland stuff. So I have experience having run adventures in the Northlands, not with a Northlands book. So the Northlands book is going to expand upon this quite a bit and talk about the different things that you have in Northlands. So I backed it. I'm excited for it. I think it's really cool. Man, the art is really good. So if you want a preview of it and you want to see the art is really outstanding. It's something that I look at in this, and the art is really outstanding. And they show a lot of the categories of the kinds of stuff that they're going to have in here. They show what stretch goals they potentially have. And they have the design of it for both D&D 2024 and Tales of the Valiant. We're going to talk about that because there's kind of an interesting angle in here that I want to talk about. I love I love the style. I think it could be really good. There's one thing that bothers me a little bit about it though. And I'm hoping that when it comes out, it really isn't much of an issue, but I've seen it as an issue in other source books that have focused on this idea of like, let's do fantasy Vikings. And one of the problem with fantasy Vikings is there's almost always a focus on raiding and good guy raiding. And the problem is, in my opinion, and this is just like my opinion, you can have your own opinion on this, right? I'm not trying to dictate anything to anybody here. I don't think you can really have good guy raiding. I think when you're raiding other villages, it's pretty brutal. And if you look at like actual sort of Viking lore and the kind of stuff that happened when one Viking tribe raided another tribe, it was really pretty ugly stuff. And I think you have to go way out of your way and do a lot of like crazy story yoga to get away from the major problematic issues of one group raiding another. And the problem is that like when you throw raiding in, you're like, oh, we're not going to have any of that stuff. Right, we're going to be good guy raiders. Oh, we take their children and bring them over, but they're treated very nicely here. And you're like, it's still kind of kidnappy, right? And so one of the things that, kind of just make me a little nervous about it is when I read things like Going Viking, right? We have the 7 Secrets of the Northlands, which are all very cool. And by the way, somehow Disney managed to put out 4 Thor movies and never cover the topic of raiding. I think you can do it. When you're doing fantasy stuff, you can do anything you want. So one of the things that Midgard does is it has real world allegories. If you look at the geography of the Midgard setting, it actually has regions that are clearly regions from our own world. And anytime we're kind of mixing our own world's history and our own world's cultures and things like that into a fantasy setting, there's this drive to kind of say, well, we're going to add some of this stuff in there. But some of the stuff is really ugly. And even if you try to say like shave off the ugliness, you look at the key issue and it's like the key issue is still there. And it's something like in my Dragon Empire game, I have to be very careful about. When I'm running Dragon Empire, one of the things that I put into my campaign guide, and I've talked to the players, and we've had to kind of reiterate this thing, is like, this game does have slavery in it, right? Like this campaign, one of the issues of this campaign that the characters are fighting against is the tyranny of the Dragon Empire. And the Dragon Empire is very racially segregated. You have scaled folk and non-scaled folk. There's kind of a nasty name that they give to non-scaled folk, which is Jambuka. And you have this sort of separation, but I have to make sure like the characters are not allowed to be racists, right? Like I don't want them. So I said like the racism that exists is emblematic of the Dragon Empire itself. And that's what you guys are fighting against. So you can't hate scaled folk for being scaled folk, right? They can hate you because you're not scaled folk, because they're the bad guys, right? But it's a really hairy line to go on. And the idea of slavery and things like that, it's like, I said, it's like veiled, right? We're not going to get into the true nastiness of slavery in this area, but it's something you're going to witness as part of this because there is that element to the Dragon Empire. So it's something that my group and I talked about. We've discussed it. We have hard lines and veils about the kind of thing that we cover there. And we kind of cover that sort of thing. So, but that's kind of, I remember when I was running Midgard and I was running the Empire of the Ghouls campaign, if you read the Midgard book, it has dwarven tribes dwarven clans that are working against some of the northern clans, and they have raiding and slavery. But it's like, well, it's, but they're like, but they're not bad guys. And I'm like, you can't have slavery and not have bad guys. Like that's, bad, they're bad. And so I had to change it, right? I had to go in there and say, no, all of the dwarven tribes have collectively outlawed any sort of slavery kind of thing. They recognize that they had that in their past, and now they don't. However, there's these other groups who have not yet let go of that, and they're bad guys, right? The Reaver groups, and they're not only slavers, they're also cannibals. So you have another aspect to it, which is even more evil, and they worship terrible gods. And that way we don't feel so bad going and cutting them down. I had to kind of make some of those changes to it. So I'm a little worried when we have things like the Going Viking section here of the Northlands book, where it says like drums of war beat in the heart of every Northlander. The raiding culture of the North is firmly woven into social, political, and religious fabric. Raids provide not only sorely needed grain, but also the opportunity to earn glory and respect in battle. Bands of raiders descend upon neighboring Northlands realms almost as often as they venture across the seas. Defending kin or community is considered just as honorable as raiding across the sea. Northerners embrace a level of savagery that would disturb those who dwell elsewhere, accepting as normal behavior what more quote-unquote civilized decry as wicked. I decree it as wicked. So I'm a little worried about a book that's trying to put too much of a shiny light on something that if you just scratch beneath the surface, it's really, really ugly. And I don't expect it will be hard, as I have with my Dragon Empire game, and as I did when I was running the Northlands sections of the Midgard campaign when I was running Empire of the Ghouls, for me to fix it. But I'm not crazy about having to throw money at it or not having to throw money at it. I'm not crazy about throwing money at something where I know that I'm going to have to kind of change it. And an example of like one of the areas is a stretch goal, right? They have the rating system. Use rating as a downtime activity. I'd rather not, right? Like defending against raiders, totally good with that, right? The idea that like, you're working for tribes that are defending the things that they got and they will help their neighboring tribes and they're there for the better one. But those jerks over there are the ones that are trying to raid and get our grain, right? That I'm good with. But if you're like, oh no, our tribe goes and raids their grain, and you're like, oh, it's just grain, right? There's no slavery. There's none of the kind of dominating the other species. We're just going and stealing all their food. All we're doing is going over there and starving them to death, right? That's okay. So that makes me a little nervous. Still, I'm on board. Right? Again, I still love the Midgard setting, even though it's got these other issues. I've been able to kind of work around them in my own game. I expect that in here, these are things I'll be able to work around. I am hopeful and trusting of the authors and the editors of Northlands to do as good a job as they can to work with this area so that we can make sure it's clear what kind of stuff we have in here, so we can make it clear with our players and we can build the kind of game that we're comfortable with. I know there are people out there who are like, this isn't a problem, you're just being a big jerk. How dare you, sir? Well, I'm not the US government. I'm not trying to censor your work, right? I am just a guy who can tell you the kind of stuff that I want to put my money towards, and I don't really want to put my money towards good guy slavery. All right, that's not the kind of thing that I'm excited about. And I'm not saying that that's what they have in here, because I don't really know. But when I hear things like downtime activity, raiding is a downtime activity, that doesn't feel like the kind of characters that I want to play with. So another interesting thing about the Northlands Kickstarter is that they are one of only 2 publishers who publish who say that they're going to release their material on D&D Beyond, and you can actually back tiers that have D&D Beyond access. What's really interesting to me about it is the pricing, right? So they have various, as I said, they're releasing the material in Tales of the Valiant, and they're releasing material for D&D 2024, which shows you like, well, this is kind of interesting. There's, how much of a mechanical difference are they running into? Well, obviously, when you're running into things like subclasses and stuff like that, there's differences enough between Tales of the Valiant and D&D 2024 that you'd have to write some pretty big conversion things to be like, here's how to use it in one system or the other. Rather than writing the conversion thing, they're literally doing 2 different versions of the book to cover that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, that's up to them. They can do what they want. But then we have like the available rewards. And for example, so there's 2 books, right? The World Book and the Sagas book. The Sagas book are like the adventures that you would run. It's actually kind of a campaign. So that looks cool. And you can get them together. So both PDFs together for $40, which is a really good deal, right? $20 per PDF. I think that that's a fine deal for good sized, with the kind of art that we were seeing. That's really interesting. And you can do that, the PDFs for 5e D&D 2024, or the PDFs for Tales of the Valiant for $40. $40 for both of them. You're like, okay, that's pretty interesting. Then you get into the 2 books, getting the 2 books on D&D Beyond. And the price is now $70. So if you want to have a limited license where you do not own your product according to the license agreement, this is not Mike Shea's opinion, this is what Wizards of the Coast tells you when you sign up, you do not own the products on D&D Beyond. If you want to have a version that you do not own, it costs you $30 more, which is like 40%. I think I did the math, right? Somebody help me with my math here. If you do 40 divided by 70, right? Minus 1. Yep. 43%. There's a 43% markup to have the D&D Beyond version of it. And you can tell not a lot of people backed it. 41 people backed the D&D Beyond version, right? Where if you look at the all PDFs for D&D 5e, it's 162 backers. And if you look at the Tales of the Valiant version, it's 133 backers. So clearly, that's 3 to 1, almost 3 to 4 to 1. Or even more than that if you include both together, right? And really, that's the answer. Like, I can't think of any good reason at all other than we just completely live on D&D Beyond. We want all the character options in D&D Beyond. And I recognize the fact that it could disappear at any time. But there's actually another risk that comes up, that has come up. So this happened with Grim Hollow Transformed. Grim Hollow Transformed also had a new D&D Beyond version that people backed on the Kickstarter. And then when they backed it, they then got news. And, we don't know exactly what happened between Ghostfire Gaming, who developed this, and Wizards of the Coast, who works on D&D Beyond. But they had to say, we have some news surrounding the D&D Beyond integrations of Grim Hollow Transformed. This is after the Kickstarter was already funded and after people had paid their money. Unfortunately, there have been some issues integrating some of the content from the Grim Hollow Player's Guide. The Transformation and Heritage trait system will be compendium only on D&D Beyond, which means it will not be a part of the character builder. Due to the unique complexity of these rules, a direct automated character builder implementation isn't possible within D&D Beyond's current platform limitations. The full Transformation and Heritage trait rules are still included in the D&D Beyond compendium and remain a core part of the Grim Hollow experience. However, they won't appear as automated character options in the character builder. Similarly, the Grim Hollow species will appear in the character builder with their default traits, and the modular heritage system will be fully documented in the compendium rather than implemented as a selectable interface. We understand that this may affect how some of you plan to use the Player's Guide. Currently, the development team who are working on the Roll20 and Fantasy, Foundry VTT, and the Foundry VTT conversions have not expressed the same limitations and are confident in the inclusion of transformations, though we cannot speak to exactly how they plan to implement them at this stage. The heritage system already exists in Roll20 and Foundry, so there are no roadblocks there. As such, if you prefer to swap your VTT selection over to an alternate platform, we can swap it for you. So good on Ghostfire for offering options to kind of have this. My point is, and I'm not poking on Ghostfire, my point is, it's pretty clear from something like this, the relationship between the publisher and Wizards of the Coast isn't always a sure thing. And Wizards of the Coast has their priorities for their developers, for the kind of work that they're doing on D&D Beyond. They're deciding how they're going to modify the stuff that's going on in D&D Beyond, which means anytime you are pre-purchasing a product like Northlands, there we go. Anytime you're pre-purchasing a product, you're the one taking the risk, right? You're taking the risk that Wizards is going to work with Kobold Press to make sure that they get all of the things in there that you expect to get. Now, very likely, Kobold Press is probably designing this stuff to ensure it will work well with the existing system that exists on D&D Beyond, so that they're not, in the case of Ghostfire, there were some kind of different ways that they were handling it, right? And that those ways of handling it turned out were probably hard to code or whatever was going on there. My point is, this is a risk, and the risk is not on Kobold Press, and the risk is not on Wizards of the Coast. The risk is on you. You're the one paying $70 up front to get this version of it, so that you have an expectation and a hope that later on, when it's released, that it is actually going to work the way you want it to work. And there are at least 3 circumstances I can think of where implementations of things on D&D Beyond did not go the way that the customers expected it to go. There were other versions where they expected a D&D 2014 version and they didn't get it. There was a version of when they had the Lord of the Rings stuff on there, not all the Lord of the Rings stuff made it into the version, or it was kind of clunky in how it worked. There's a lot of risk there, right? And a lot of that risk is held elsewhere. But I think when you mix these two things together, right? When you mix the idea of a 43% markup in cost to have the D&D Beyond version over the PDF, you don't get the PDFs with this either. You're just getting the D&D Beyond version. It'd be one thing if you got the PDFs and the D&D Beyond version for $70. Then you're like, okay, well, that markup kind of makes sense. The $30 extra I'm paying for the D&D Beyond version. It's $30 extra just for the D&D Beyond version. That's bananas. So what am I going to do? So I back the Tales of the Valiant version because I like Tales of the Valiant. I'm running Tales of the Valiant for my Dragon Empire game. I really enjoy it. And if I was going to run a Northlands campaign, and I don't know that I'm going to run it in any time, I don't foresee running it in the next year or so, but I don't think it's going to take a year before it comes out. By the time it comes out, maybe I'm ready to run a Northlands campaign. And when I get time to run it, I want to run it with Tales of the Valiant, because then I feel like, and this is just kind of a way that I run my games, right? I kind of like to, if there's a publisher who published it and they have their own rule set, why don't I just run with the same rule set? It's one of the reasons I like sort of customizing each of my campaigns, even if they're 5e, by saying, here's the core book, here's one supplement book, and then here's the campaign we're going to be running, right? I think that works well. For my Dragon Empire game, we're just using the Player's Guide for Tales of the Valiant, because that's really fun. If I was running a Northlands campaign, I would want to run it with Tales of the Valiant, and the Northlands book. And then all the player options from the Northlands books works well in Tales of the Valiant. Like that feels nice. So the one that I'm ordering for myself, I'm ordering the physical copy of both books and the PDF copies. So the one I'm ordering is the Tales of the Valiant Northlands complete bundle. It's got like a little dice bag. It's got little like it's got a rune deck and rune tokens. It's got the 2 physical books and the 2 books in PDF, which I will then own forever. I can put them on my hard drive. I can back them up to my 8-3, multiple backups to multiple cloud providers, 2 different drives hooked up to my Raspberry Pi, my solid state drive and my spinning disk drive that are connected to my laptop. And then I can have it forever and nobody can control it. Also, I know they're going to get the PDF right. I know that there's not going to be an issue where something down the line, some relationship with some other company isn't going to go bad and somehow my PDF isn't going to work. I am sure that is going to work. So anyway, those are the kind of things I want to talk about this campaign. I'm excited for it. I look forward to it. I love the work that Kobold Press does, and I'm eager to see it come forward. So that is the long diatribe on the Northlands Kobold Press Kickstarter, which is live on Kickstarter now. You can find a link down in the show notes. So last week, I talked about my experiences with Daggerheart, which I really, really loved. And one of the things I brought up was the only issue that I brought up is how Daggerheart handles initiative. And I got a lot of feedback from people, most of which was saying, just try it. It'll work out fine. And I can totally understand that, right? I can totally see that. Yes, it's very possible that it just works out fine. Because somehow, if you look at like 5e, if we're comparing Daggerheart to 5e, one of the things you see in 5e is that we don't have initiative for anything other than combat. Only in combat do you actually have initiative. And somehow we've been playing it online. I've been running games for a long time and it's generally worked out. So why does the conversation have to change when combat is going on as opposed to anything else? That said, I still think, and so I think it's a very reasonable argument. Some people were stronger about it than others of saying like, you haven't played enough of it to really understand it yet, which is true. And that the people who are mostly complaining about turn order are the people who haven't played it, which is not true because I've had friends who have played it. I've had multiple friends who have played it who said, yeah, the turn order thing ended up being weird. I had situations where my character who was in the right spot at the right time and did the most damage just kept going over and over because everyone's like, yeah, just keep going until he's dead. Right? Your dice are hot. It's almost like a shooter in craps. Like the shooter just keeps shooting and shooting and shooting because they're hot, right? Or they're in the right spot at the right time. That actually happened. That is not that isn't a theory. That actually occurred. I think that instead of having rules, this is what I think is the thing that I'm taking from it. Instead of having rules about how to handle turn order and initiative in Daggerheart, you can have sort of loose guidelines. And so an example is like when we talk about Balsera style initiative. So here's an interesting one. This is a rule set that is part of the Fate system reference document that they call elective action order. And elective action order has different names for it. Some people have called it popcorn initiative. Some people have called it Balsera style initiative. So, and they say other terms such as popcorn initiative have been floated, but are not preferred. They call it an elective action order. That's kind of a mouthful, if you ask me. I think I'm going to stick to Balsera style initiative. And the way that this kind of initiative works, I've described this in the previous show too, is essentially each player decides who gets to go next. So a player starts and they do a thing and then they say, and now Jack is going to go. And then Jack says, okay, I'm going to do my thing. And now Jane is going to go. And I actually saw a style of this that Kevin Crawford used, which I liked better. He actually ran it at a table that I was at a long time ago. And what he did is said, each player describes who's going to go next before they do their action. So if you say, Araviz, it's your turn. Araviz says, great, Sindel is going to go after me. And Araviz then does their turn. And then Sindel has this time, the player of Sindel has this time to say, great, Draith is going after I am, and now Sindel's going to do X, Y, and Z. Now, one of the reasons why that sort of popcorn initiative, so that each player is kind of deciding who goes after, and then they can kind of say, has anybody not gone recently? And they go, oh, I haven't. Okay, you're going to go next. Then I do my turn and then I go forward. So then, yeah, and exactly. The Kevin Crawford method is good because the next person gets to start thinking about their turn. They know they're going up. It's sort of like what I have done at my initiative games where I talk about who's on deck. I'll say like, Araven is up. Araven, it's your turn. Draith, you're on deck, right? And then Draith knows, okay, I should get ready, right? I should be paying attention and get ready. So I think that style works. You don't have to make this a hard rule, though. You don't have to say we are going to be using Balsera style initiative or elective action order initiative for Daggerheart. You can just say to players, hey, one of the ways that you might want to think about running turns is describe who goes after you go. So when you go, do your thing, but then ask, based on the fiction, based on what's going on, you can pick out who goes next and think about picking out who goes next before you actually do your turn. It's not like a hard rule, right? And people can jump and shift and you can change. Hey, can I go instead? Sure. You can shift all you want, but you still have this general path that's letting the players have control of the spotlight. Now, one of the reasons why this works really, really well, I think, with Daggerheart, or could work really, really well with Daggerheart, that makes it slightly different than like how it works in other systems like Fate, is that the creatures get the spotlight when you roll with fear. So you don't have to worry about when the monsters go. The monsters spotlight in every time one of the characters rolls with fear. So that way there's this constant back and forth of the characters going, and sometimes the monster goes when they roll with fear, sometimes they don't. So it's all jumping around. So you as a GM never really need to worry about, are the monsters getting their time in the spotlight? Are they getting the action economy? The controls for the game are already allowing for it in the same way that they do in a Powered by the Apocalypse style game. So I think that could really work well. I think that you could definitely drop in a sort of Balsera style, popcorn style, elective action order initiative, but not have to make it a hard rule, right? And generally, I think you could almost just have a conversation with the players and just say, we don't have a hardened initiative system for this game. There isn't a hardened turn order for this game. The fiction kind of dictates who goes. That said, each of you are responsible for ensuring the other players get their time in the spotlight. If you feel like you haven't had or heard from one of the players in a bit, and even if it's not your turn, if you haven't heard from one of the players in a bit, you might suggest that somebody else leap in. And that not only helps ensure that everybody is getting their time in the spotlight, it removes a burden from the GM of worrying about that. We can worry about it as well, but now all of the players are responsible for ensuring people have their time in the spotlight. And then you can bring up the idea of elective action order as an option to say, and here's one way you could do that, is when you're about to go, maybe you describe who you think should go after you, right? And then we can make sure everybody's going right. So I think that style can still work. I don't think it has to be a hardened rule. I think that for some people it was criticism, for some people it's just feedback on the idea that like, hey, just try it. It works. I think that that's probably true. I was bringing up that in online play, I could see it being particularly tricky because it's just easy to lose track of people online. It's harder to read body language because of lag in audio. People are very careful about not overstepping. So that means some players just never talk, right? They just don't say anything because they don't want to interrupt somebody else. And you're almost always interrupting somebody else. So having some kind of turn order, this is something I heard from the Dungeon Master Diaries podcast. They said that the Shadowdark style initiative, where you go around the table and everybody knows their spot and you're always on an initiative, means that the GM is acting as a good arbiter to make sure that the people have their opportunity to speak. And since you're always on, you're doing that. Well, we can take a variant of that and not make it such a hard rule. Still let the fiction dictate what's happening, but help ensuring that each person's kind of calling on another person to make sure that everybody's getting their time in the spotlight, particularly for online play. I'm hoping to run Daggerheart. I'm excited to run it. I really want to run it, and I will learn more about what this is actually like as I get more experience running Daggerheart, hopefully both in person and online. So we'll see. But I wanted to offer that feedback because a fair number of people had feedback on that. So I ran a poll recently. I was noticing over on the Sly Flourish Patreon Discord server that there's lots of conversations going on about a lot of other games. And I was like, is this mostly just, is this sort of survivorship bias of some sort or availability bias that basically there's the people that are talking a lot are talking about lots of other games? Or are we really seeing a big kind of new surge of people playing lots of other role-playing games? So I don't have access to the entire RPG community, all the players of all RPGs across the world. Nobody does. But I do have some access to you guys. Those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube, particularly the people watching on YouTube, is where I can get the most feedback. So I can get some feedback from those of you watching on YouTube, which isn't everybody. It's not the people subscribed to the newsletter. It's not the people, not necessarily the people that are joining the Patreon or anything like that. But it's a lot of people, right? And I could ask, hey, are you playing other games? And I did, and I got some really interesting results. So I posted this back on 28 August, and I got about 3,300 respondents to it. So of the sampled group, I had a pretty good representative sample of the group that I was reaching, which is YouTube followers, right? People that generally follow my stuff on YouTube. So this, again, not representative of anything else, but I do feel like it's probably representative of you guys, right? The people that are hearing me and watching me right now. I think it's probably pretty representative of that. I think it's pretty safe. Is it representative of the whole RPG community? No, it is not. We don't have that information. But we do have this, and I thought it was really interesting. So I asked this question. This is a question for RPG players and GMs. I always try to define who I'm asking this to. In this case, it's literally anybody that is either running or playing role-playing games. How often do you play games besides D&D 5e, 2014 or 2024? So I was interested specifically in trying to find out how many people are playing other games other than D&D 5e, either 2014 or 2024. I got 3,300 respondents, and I had 4 responses. Response number 1 was almost always. I almost always play games other than 5e. I often play games other than 5e. I rarely play games other than 5e. And almost never. I almost never play games other than D&D 5e. And it was actually a very even split between all of those. Almost always, i.e. people who almost always play games other than D&D 5e, were 32%. Basically 1 in 3 of you almost always are playing games other than D&D 5e. That's pretty interesting. Often is 1 in 4, right? About 25%. 1 in 4 of you are often playing games that aren't D&D 5e. So when we combine those two together, we have about 6 out of 10 are either often or almost always or always playing games other than D&D 5e, about 6 in 10. I rarely play games other than D&D 5e was about a quarter. It's 23%, right? And then almost never, the people that are almost never playing games other than D&D 5e, i.e. almost always or always playing D&D 5e, was 1 in 5, 20%. So we have more people that are playing games other than 5e, the majority, at least often or more, than the people who are rarely playing games other than 5e. What this tells me, so what do I gather from this? And what I gather from this is that there's lots of people still playing 5e, right? Because you have often, rarely, and almost never accounts for about 2/3, right? 2/3 of people are almost always or often or rarely playing 5e games, right? About 2/3 of people are still playing 5e games. But more than that are people that are playing other games, right? At least 4 out of 5 are playing other games other than 5e, at least rarely. And so that actually kind of changes things for me a bit in the sort of things I want to talk about and the sort of things I want to offer. Now, I'd already kind of rebranded a lot of my stuff away from D&D and away from 5e after the OGL catastrophe, not to kind of distance myself from WotC and their nonsense, but to recognize how much bigger the hobby was and to recognize that, like, if you are playing a role-playing game, I'm on your side. I said this, I went and listened to my old OGL rant. And one of the things I said in my OGL rant, which I think is a firm philosophy that I have, is if you're playing an RPG, I'm on your side. I love all games. And if you're playing an RPG, you and I are together, right? That's what matters to me, is we're playing RPGs. I don't care what RPG you're playing. And it's maybe an RPG that I don't really dig. That's cool. And I might love RPGs that you don't really dig. And that's cool. But rather than us fighting about which RPGs we like or don't like, is the fact that we should embrace the fact both of us love RPGs and recognize the value that these RPGs have in our lives, because in my opinion, RPGs are really important. It does tell me that I want to focus more of my time and my attention on the kind of material that people can use for any of the RPGs that they're running, including 5e, right? So I want to write more guidance and share more experiences and talk about interesting things from different games. This whole thing that I just talked about with the Balsera Style Initiative. Maybe you never heard of Balsera Style Initiative. I don't even remember what they called it. Elective order action, something like that. But what this definitely tells me is I want to focus on RPGs overall. I will still write and offer up thoughts on 5e. But now I'm seeing so many people that are playing games other than 5e that I really want to focus on the guidance that anyone can use for whatever role-playing they've got. So it's going to, not drastic changes, right? I don't think you're going to see like huge shifts in focus, but it kind of shifts me into this larger viewpoint of like, we're all here enjoying role-playing games, whether it's 5e, whether it's D&D, whether it's, any number of RPGs. I mean, for a long time now, I've talked about lots of other RPGs. I've reviewed them on the show. I've promoted them for Kickstarters. I've played them. I've run lots of things. And so I think I'm going to continue to do that. And I want to spend even more time, like when I'm looking at the articles that I write for my newsletters, I probably want to keep the ratio of 5e to other topics to at least 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 5, to kind of account for this group. Recognizing the fact that 2/3 of people play 5e, so it's not that out of hand. So maybe on the order of, probably like 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4. Because the other articles are still useful for 5e, right? They're useful if you're playing 5e. Right? I think that can really work. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting insight, and it was something that I wanted to share, some kind of information that I wanted to pass along. Speaking of 5e, let's talk about crafting magic items in 5e. Ironic, isn't it, that I just did a segment where I talked about how lots of people are playing lots of other RPGs, and I'm going to reduce the amount of specific 5e stuff, and then immediately jump into a tip for 5e, but here we are. So I've done a series of articles and a series of videos on different aspects of D&D and 5e economy. I've talked about better treasure parcels, like lazy treasure parcels. You can find links to these in the show notes. I talked about lazy treasure parcels. I talked about lazy 5e magic item prices. How can you decide what the value of a magic item is, either for buying or for selling or for something like that? And now I'm going to talk about crafting. We're going to talk about crafting magic items. In my opinion, a major failure of the D&D 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide is the crafting rules that they put in there are far too easy to use and give far too much of an opportunity for players to optimize their way out of the fun, to basically go and specifically get all the magic items they need in order to maximize the survivability and output of their character to the point where the game is going to get boring. And this is not a theory. I've seen experiences that GMs shared where they opened up the crafting system and they had characters who had 10 rings of resistance for all of the different damage types. So they only ever took half damage for almost anything they got hit by. They all had magic armor that let them cast a shield spell. So essentially they all got to use the reaction to get +5 to AC all the time because it was wide open. So that is obviously an issue. So I wanted to offer some lazy crafting guidance for 5e magic items. And this could be transferable to other systems as well. I didn't really think about it for other systems. I really focused on crafting items for 5e. So first, we have some philosophical pieces. 1, crafting shouldn't overtake typical treasure. The best way to get treasure in a D&D 5e game, in my opinion, is to go on adventures and get loot. Right? That you get it from villains that you defeat, you get it from treasure, from monsters that you defeat. You go on adventures and you acquire loot from adventures. And to me, that is the primary way that adventurers should get treasure, because that is really the core gameplay loop of the game. Is characters go on adventures, they fight monsters, they defeat challenges, and they get rewards for those challenges. The minute you start to shift something away and say, well, now we're going to put in a crafting system, is the minute you kind of move people away from what the core gameplay loop is like. One of the video gamey sort of examples for this, and I'm going to butcher this one, but I'm sure I'll get comments back that can explain exactly what happened. There was a Star Wars massive online game. I can't remember if it was Star Wars Old Republic. It might have been Star Wars Old Republic. And one of the things that happened is it turned out that it was actually more profitable and beneficial to be a sand farmer on Tatooine than it was to go like into an X-Wing or go on missions, right? That it was safer, and the amount of kind of currency and stuff and credits you could generate was better that way. And what they found is so many players moved to that direction that no one was actually playing the game. And they actually did a massive rework of like the class system and the action system. And a bunch of people were really pissed off because they're like, I liked farming sand, like sand farming. Being a sand farmer on Tatooine, maybe it was Star Wars Galaxies. This sounds like Star Wars Galaxies. Yeah, I don't think it was Old Republic. I think it was Star Wars Galaxies. It was the first Star Wars MMO, this 20 years ago or something like that. And they changed the whole game around because they're like, yeah, the economy doesn't work because this thing happens. So it has happened in video games where you end up shifting it around. And do you really want to turn your D&D game into something where downtime is the only thing they're doing? right? That is one of the issues. So in my opinion, no, you do not. In my opinion, you want the gameplay, the strength of a game like this, the strength of these, these fantasy role-playing, action-based fantasy role-playing games, and D&D 5e in particular, 5e in general, is the gameplay loop of going on adventures, facing monsters, facing challenges, and getting rewards, right? And everything else kind of falls into that loop. So you want a crafting system to augment that, not to replace it. That's the big one. And the number one thing that you want to do, whatever crafting system you put in place, in my opinion, is limit crafting with rare components. And this is the dirty trick of crafting. And I've had players who figured this out and looked at me and were like, that's not a crafting system, man. Like what you created is no different than normal loot. And I was like, that's true. Which is you can make the rare component that crafting should require rare components, and rare components should require you going on adventures and fighting monsters and defeating challenges and getting the rare component. And then when you have the rare component, then you can go back and craft a magic item with it. Right? And maybe it gives you some more options for customization that you might not have if you got the regular loot. But the trick is you're just giving it out like normal loot, right? That the rare, instead of giving out the fancy armor, you're giving the rare component that lets them build the fancy armor, right? And again, if you expose that too much, your players are going to be mad. But really, you need something like this. So this gives you the option and opportunity to ensure you don't have the 10 rings of resistance problem, right? That players don't immediately shift all of their resources to just go crafting stuff. And they just know all we have to do is go, pay for all this stuff. We just get money and we put the money in and we can get anything we want. Instead, you're like, no, if you want that one thing, you're going to have to get that one rare component to be able to do it. And some of them might not ever be available. Oh, I want to make a suit of studded leather armor that can cast the shield cantrip. And you're like, oh, well, there's other cantrip, or not shield cantrip, the shield spell. Well, there's other ones you can get. Right? But you can't get shield. I don't know why. That component is super rare, and I think it's been destroyed. I think somebody else got it. Right? And they died in the Astral Sea, in the depths of the Astral Sea. I don't think you'll ever find them. So you can limit the rare component, and by limiting the rare component, that's how you can keep a handle on ensuring that the core gameplay loop is still there. But what components? How do you know what the rare components are? Well, luckily, lots of different people have come up with ideas for this, but the one I'll pick out is the Level Up Advanced 5e Trials and Treasure book, which is also available in their system reference document, includes rare components for various magic items. So, we'll take a quick example here. So an example would be like the Wand of Fireballs, right? This is a rare wand, and they have a crafting component on here, and it says Ember from the Elemental Plane of Fire. Now, you could actually say this, and then what I would do is instead of using this and saying that's what it is, you use that as inspiration. And you can say, like, there is a rare stone that has apparently come out of the elemental plane of fire, but you're going to have to go into one of the volcanic regions of the areas where the boundaries between the elemental plane of fire and there, and then you're going to have to defeat, the heart of a fire titan, right? Or the heart of a greater elemental is what you require. And then the characters would go, oh, okay, well, we're going to keep an eye out for these greater fire elementals if we can ever get down that way. And then when they get that one, and it's like one component, right? And they're not really going to be able to get 5 of them. They can only get the one. But when they get that the ember heart of a elder fire elemental, then they can be like, now I've got the component in order to craft a wand of fireballs, right? So you can use these ideas, and there are other ones, and you can come up with your own. It doesn't really matter, but I would make them pretty unique. So an example, I mean, if you have the creature like this in here, but you could say that in order to build a wand of magic missiles, you need a talon of a void dragon, right? These super rare dragons that come from like the astral plane or these realms, and void dragons have this kind of innate breakdown of magic so that they have pure force energy. It doesn't mean you have to go kill an ancient an ancient void dragon, but maybe you have to go find one of the claws and you have to do some research about where one of these claws might exist. Or they could find it in a pile of loot and you find a claw of a void dragon that's able to craft a wand of magic missiles. So it's not even that they have to go on a quest to do it. Maybe they pick up that thing and that's the component that they use in order to make a wand. Now the question comes up, well, why not just give them the loot? And the answer might be, you can just go give them the loot. You don't have to do it. But there's kind of a fun thing for the characters to be able to collect stuff and go back and go do the work and figure out how to make a thing. It makes it more solid. So you might, it makes their connection to the item better. And you might even include items that are a little bit more powerful than they would normally be, but it's harder to make it because they have to go through the aspect of crafting it. But that's probably my number one thing. The number one thing is limit the ingredient that is required to make the magic item so that you are still using the core gameplay loop and you're limiting their ability to just pour money into the problem and get anything they want. So who decides what's craftable? You do. However, you the GM. However, you and your players can work together, and the player could say, I really want to make a particular kind of thing. And you could look at what they're making and you can ask yourself, like, are they making this just because they never want to be hit? Or they, like, is this an actual cool thing? Or is this just the kind of thing that's really just optimizing their character? And you might change things around. You might say, you can't do that, but what if you did this instead? Or what if you added this other fun component? I go to the idea of, like, instead of having +3 plate armor, which any like tank wearer, any fighter or paladin would love to have +3 plate armor. What if you have plate armor that could cast the spell Fire Shield on it? It didn't have a plus bonus, but it let you put up a damage aura instead. That could be more fun, but doesn't just optimize around the idea that they never want to be hit. Now they want to be hit because now they're taking damage. Now they're dishing out damage every time they're hit, and maybe it can cast Fire Shield once a day. So that could be like a cool, different way of putting out a piece of magic item, putting out a piece of craftable stuff that they might really want. So you get to decide what is craftable, and you can work with your players to decide it. Sometimes there's obvious ones, like taking dragon scales and turning it into dragon scale armor. That's a real common one. I've got 2 characters that have dragon scale armor now, silver dragon scale and black dragon scale armor, because they defeated super powerful silver and black dragons and looted the ideas, or looted some of the stuff and then turned it in. And that one, they didn't go seek it. They just acquired it and made the armor. Crafting costs. So the easy way to do a crafting cost, in my opinion, is to use the same general costs for lazy 5e magic item pricing, which I had talked about earlier. As a reiteration, you can use this as a rough guide. 500 gold piece for uncommon magic items, 5,000 gold piece for rare items, 50,000 gold piece for very rare items, and 500,000 for legendary items. Now, you are encouraged to tailor those prices around the kind of item that's getting made, the kind of economy in your game, however you want to do it. But I like the 500, 5,000, 50,000, 500,000 because it's easy to remember. But that could be a baseline. And the idea is that covers the costs for hirelings to work with to help you make the item if you need them. It covers the other remaining costs. Even if, like, you're making a fancy sword, you have to put that money into the sword itself just to get it to the point where it can accept the magic. So that's where you start to decide, like, that's how much it costs to get all of the components required on top of getting the rare component. Again, you can tailor those prices. If you want it to be less, you can certainly make it less. If you want it to be more, it could be more. You can kind of tailor things out. Now, here's an issue where crafting magic items tends to fall apart in most of the systems that I've seen, and that's the amount of crafting time. There's this idea that really powerful items take more time to make. The problem from the gameplay perspective is, what the hell are you going to do with that whole scene? So let's say they want to make a Staff of Power. They have to get the eye of Zaravax the Lich. Maybe they actually have to fight a Lich. Maybe they don't have to fight a Lich. Maybe they have to make a deal, but they got to go on an adventure and go get this glass eye of Zaravax. And it's going to cost you 50,000 gold pieces for it, right? That in order to craft the staff, in order to get all the rest of the components, it's going to cost you roughly 50,000. You could add some randomness in there. You could throw something. It's 52,538 gold in order to be able to build this Staff of Power. But then you might say, well, the crafting time, because it's very rare, is like 16 weeks. Well, what's happening during those 16 weeks could be a whole campaign, right? And maybe you are following Gyri Gygax's rules and having a strict campaign, and maybe you're not. And the question is, like, how much actual game time in world do you want to have spent for this? So I have a simpler system. Just have it take... If they're hiring hirelings, if they're throwing the money at it, if they have the rare component, then say that it basically takes a single unit of downtime. That ideally, what it means is when they go off on an adventure, if on the assumption they're having hirelings do it for them, and I would probably recommend that rather than them spending it themselves, but maybe you could have them work on it as well. That instead of like waiting around and being like, well, maybe way later on you're going to get it, that if they go on an adventure, they go off, they go do a bunch of stuff, and then they come back, by the time they come back, the thing is made. Right? The time got made. And that way you're not spending a lot of time on the actual creating the magic item. The limitation is not on time. The limitation is on money, and the limitation is on that rare component. And that way you don't have this sort of clunky system of having to wait how many sessions, and you've got to keep track of it. If you want to limit it, one way to limit it would be to say that it's up to the character to help make this item, and that when they make their way back, they make one Arcana check. And if they succeed on the check, the item is made. If they fail on the check, they're going to have to do another downtime session, right? They'll have to wait another one. So if you want to limit it, you could do it that way. I don't know that I would really worry about it. Instead, I would just say that basically once you have spent the money, it is crafted. So I like to think about crafting magic items as one of the many different treasure options that exists inside our RPG. That you can roll randomly for treasure when the characters come up with treasure parcels. I love rolling randomly. You can also look at the characters and decide what kind of items you think they would be interested in and drop those in there. You can talk to your players to get a wish list of the kind of items they want to have, and you can work with them to come up with ideas for items that they might be able to craft. But you don't want to affect that core gameplay loop. You don't want to make it where this has become the new way to get loot. And actually, it's way better than adventuring. It's way better than going off on your own thing, because we want the game to remain the kind of fun, exciting, action-based game that we've got. But you still want to have fun options for the characters to be able to get interesting custom magic items that they're able to kind of piece together themselves. Every quarter on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Patreon Q&A. Every month, a patron can ask any RPG-related question, and every Friday, I go through all of the existing questions and answer them, and some of those questions I bring here to the show so we can dive into it a little deeper. Kreger says, I have recently embraced the lazy GM idea of running a homebrew campaign or adventures in a published campaign setting. Awesome. Specifically, D&D 2024 in the Forgotten Realms. Very cool. How would you go about adding custom locations into an established world? For example, my campaign idea features a specific sort of starting area. Should I find an existing location that matches it closely, or find a relatively empty spot on the map where I can drop in my original creations? Similar to the idea of dropping in the City of Arches into Faerûn. You can do either. If you find a location that already exists, then that can work. If you instead have a kind of, you didn't say exactly what made your location different. So that's part of the question, but really either can work fine. I think the only real issues that people have working in established published settings for the most part is if their players have one view of what that place is like and you have a different view. So you might have to have that conversation of like, hey, I'm going to be setting mine in the Cormyr region of Forgotten Realms. We're going to start in the small village of Cormorp. That was actually the first place I ever ran a D&D adventure, was in the city of Cormorp. I don't know if Cormorp is in... I've got the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms book right here. Let's take a look and see if Cormorp is in here. Can't read it. Text is really small. Somehow, over the years, the text has gotten smaller in these books. I don't understand why. Cormorp, 227. Cormorp, a village of 810 people. The town of Cormorp is a flea speck, slightly over a dozen permanent buildings on the dusk road between Hulthver and Hill's Edge. Most of the area's inhabitants are halflings and gnomes, with a few humans who live in small homes. In the hills behind the town, Cormorp's lord, Dungist Holtail, is a Harper sympathizer who frequently calls on the Harpers of Burdusk for aid. Many halflings passing through the hills above Cormorp are skilled adventurers themselves, and some of them are Harpers. Fun little starting place. And I ran my first adventure there. And there's something to that. So an interesting thing that I don't know if this is well known. So Icewind Dale, right? Icewind Dale is now super popular. It is one of the highlighted regions in the upcoming Forgotten Realms book that's coming out in a couple of months. It was heavily... it was the main region for the game Rime of the Frost Maiden, the campaign adventure Rime of the Frost Maiden, and there was a Legacy of the Crystal Shard adventure that was put out in the earliest days of 5e. Icewind Dale wasn't known by anybody, which was the reason that they gave it to R.A. Salvatore to write the Drizzt novels. As they said, we're doing all of our stuff on the Sword Coast and Waterdeep and in Cormyr and in Shadowdale, where like the real popular areas, right central to the Forgotten Realms. But you can have that icy north. We haven't really done anything there. We call it 10 towns, but there's like hardly anything written about it. And R.A. Salvatore's like, cool, I want to write about that, right? And he wrote the Crystal Shard, which is an excellent book. The original Crystal Shard. It was really, really fun fantasy novel. And he focused on that. And that made it big. And then suddenly everybody knew about Icewind Dale, right? Like suddenly that became a new region. But you can kind of do the same thing of like something that is, a small village of halflings with 810 people that some humans live behind could be like the center of your own like campaign world, because you get to kind of build it out how you want to build it out. But I think that key is to make sure that your players don't hang on to the lore of the region so much that that what you do with it begins to clash with what they do with it. The alternative is exactly what you said, which is find an unknown region, throw a town in there, and wow, Wizards of the Coast does it all the time, right? Wizards of the Coast has towns and adds towns to the Forgotten Realms that have never been there before. So you have absolutely every capability to do so. I don't really know, and I don't really have an answer to your question, which is, should you do one or the other? I think you can really do either. I think, to me, I would probably, on the assumption what I was coming up with wasn't too weird, like City of Arches is weird enough that I would drop the City of Arches into a brand new location. I would go find a spot. I was thinking of like the eastern side of the Anorek Desert would make sense for the City of Arches. And then I would drop it in to my own world. But the creators of these worlds are creating new towns all the time. There's absolutely no reason that you can't do so. Sweet G says, I often find myself with some time between campaigns where I want to be setting things up and getting ahead on some of the game prep, but I always get lost in focusing on the wrong things. What does the lazy GM method look like for prepping an upcoming campaign or organizing the lazy version of a campaign world for use in a game before you have players and or characters? Good question. And I don't grab onto the idea of right and wrong things. I will say there are things that you might end up spending your time thinking about that end up not being of high value, or that could steer the game in the wrong direction of you kind of railroading things. So when you say wrong, I think that's what you mean. I'm just always bristle at the idea that there's right and wrong ways to do things, because there's so many different ways and so many examples where people do it a different way and it turned out to work just fine. Generally speaking, the things I would avoid are things where you have expectations about the direction the characters are going to go. So, for example, I would not hang on too tightly to the overall arc of your campaign. It's going to start here, then it's going to go here, then it's going to go here, then it's going to go here, then it's going to end there. You can do that sometimes. Like I have the campaign arcs inside City of Arches, and if you look at campaign adventures, they are often outlined by these big things. But generally, I would be wary of figuring out what the path is that the characters are going to take. And instead, you can kind of focus on the things that exist and how they grow regardless of the characters. So that's why, like, when you focus on NPCs, like the major fronts, who are the major villains in your game? What are they doing? What do they want? What areas are they worried about? Interesting locations. What are some kind of cool locations that you think fit the campaign theme, that fit the setting that you're putting this in, and what makes those interesting? Maybe you use them, maybe you don't. But even if you and you could do those by tier. Like, what are the tier 1 adventure locations for this campaign I'm going to do? What are the tier 2 ones? What are the tier 3 ones? What are the tier 4 ones? And even if you don't use the tier 4 ones because you don't go up to 18th level, you could still say, yeah, but they know about those places. They know about the floating, the castle of death that's floating up in the sky. No one's able to reach it because it's surrounded by undead dragons. So you could still have them from a lore perspective, even if you don't end up using them in your game. You could focus on history, politics, factions, and what's going on with factions. One of the things that I've been working on, so this is a good example of like in my Dragon Empire game, which, is kind of my richest at this point because it's, we're in the middle of the campaign. The other two are at the end of their campaign. So I'm not really spending a lot of time thinking about the future on those because they're going to end in the next 6 weeks or so. That one I think about, and one of the things that I find really useful is just like, what are the possible quests that are going to come in front of the characters? If I just make a giant list of fun thematic quests, and these are the idea of like, what's the thing that they might want to go do? Are they going to take one of the secret children of the dragon Parsis and smuggle them out of the Dragon Empire and thus strengthen an alliance with one of the dragons? Are they going to assassinate one of the Morza, one of the Dragon Empires themselves? Are they going to go find a powerful dragon slaying weapon that the dragons are trying to move or hide or destroy? And I don't find that I'm going to necessarily use all of those, but it gets my head around the idea of like, what are the kinds of quests that might show up in front of the characters? And I can keep that list. So for me, the kind of things that I think are useful to think about are the villains and what they're up to and what their plots are and what their quests they're going on. History of the area, theology, like who are the gods and what's going on with those. What are the locations? I think coming up with like interesting locations that you could, adventure locations is good. And the quests that the characters might go on. I think like those are all areas where I think you can put some time. Friend of the show, Scipio, brings up a article that I had written. Let's take a look at this. So yeah, back in 2020, this was kind of a fun one. Back in 2020, I had a time where I said, you know what? I have a Saturday where I don't have anything to do. I'm going to spend my whole Saturday doing game prep, right? I'm just going to prep. And this was when I was running a Ghost of Saltmarsh game. And so it was like, what should I focus on? And I asked Twitter about it. This is back when Twitter was a fun place. And I asked, like, what should they focus on? I got 220 replies. It was maps, NPCs, players, encounters, prep, character notes, some fun things. So then I was like, okay, what am I going to work on? And so I focused on maps. I was like, I'm going to print like full size, perfectly squared maps using Blueprint. This is a real trick. If you want to take like a Dyson map and print it for cheap, you can do it as a blueprint, and that works really well. And I spent a couple hours on that. I thought about the adventure, but read through the whole campaign again. I gathered miniatures, like what are all the miniatures I'm going to need? And what I found is a lot of the stuff that I prepped, I didn't actually end up using. It turns out I really didn't need a lot of that stuff. So there was definitely like diminishing returns on what I prepped. And I printed a lot of those maps out, and I don't think I used hardly any of them. So it turns out, good thing they were cheap, because I didn't really use them at all. So those are the main things that I would focus on are the villains and what they're up to, maybe other NPCs and other factions and what they're up to. What quests could the characters go on? What locations could they explore? So almost like taking each of the 8 steps and kind of blowing them out and longer term. But be ready to toss a lot of that aside, because, all these plans change the minute the characters start going on adventures. Lumbee says, how do you go about prepping for each session when the party is at a fork in the road? My next game is picking up at the center of a large dungeon. The players can choose to go anywhere. I prep the 8 steps to flesh out some areas and encounters in the direction I'm guessing they'll go, but I can't help but think they're going to turn right when I prep them to turn left, leaving me to improv the session. I'd love to hear your thoughts in this type of situation. So there are two. In your case, you're talking almost literally a fork in the road. You're talking about like the path of a dungeon. And this gets into how we use the 8 steps to prep a dungeon, which is different than how we might prep the 8 steps for other kinds of adventures that we run. So when we're prepping an adventure, when we're prepping a session that's going to take place in the dungeon, we don't want to necessarily focus on each room and the things that are going on in each of those rooms, because we could end up spending a lot of time, especially like, let's say there's 20 rooms. Well, if you have 20 rooms where you're doing like fantastic locations and NPCs and monsters, and you're really filling them out, that could take forever. So instead, what I like to do for a dungeon is I like to keep a list of the potential chambers that the characters might run into when they're traveling through the dungeon. You can associate these directly to each room on the map if you want, or instead you could try my laziest trick, which I just wrote about and is linked down in the show notes, where I literally just make a list of possible locations that they might run into. So almost in the same way that we abstract secrets and clues and NPCs and monsters and treasure from where they're going to find them, the locations themselves might be abstracted. And then you can kind of decide, does it make sense that this is an old brewery? Or is this an actual torture chamber? Or is this an old shrine? And you can decide like what type of place they're going to find as they go. That drives some people bananas. They think like that's absolute quantum ogering, and that's the worst thing you could possibly do. Honestly, it's like if you're making it up beforehand or you're making it up during the game, I don't really see much of a difference, but that's just me. But the main thing is you don't want to necessarily prep a dungeon the same way that you would be prepping major scenes of another kind of adventure. And the fact that the 8 steps are abstract, that your list of monsters is separate from your list of NPCs, which is separate from your secrets and clues, which is separate from your treasure, means and your locations, means you can build those scenes up as the characters are going. You can decide what kind of monsters are there. You can decide what the attitudes are. You can decide whether or not the characters get to jump on the monsters or the monsters get to jump on the characters. You can decide if there's any treasure in those rooms. You can decide if there's an NPC. You could, mix 2 different monster types together that are conflicting with each other when the characters get there. So you can really, one of the main things that the 8 steps is designed to do is to give you the material to help you build the story as you go. And build out the scenes as you run them at your game, rather than preparing every scene ahead of time. So that's the main thing I would say as far as like when they're going into a dungeon, how do you decide what you prep? I'll tell you one area where people get into trouble with this, and this is when they're using like virtual tabletops and they need to like put all the monsters and everything in every room. It takes forever. I don't really have a good solution for that other than, try to work with your tools to help you be able to improvise combat encounters or improvise maps as you go, because it can end up speeding things up quite a bit. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. If you enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator PDF for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related email with links to all of the other work that I do sent directly to your inbox. You can also join us on Patreon. Patreon patrons get access to all kinds of great things like the 5e Artisanal Database. Hero tier subscribers get access to the weekly Readings and Reflections podcast, the City of Arches scenarios, lots of stuff you get access to for being a patron of Sly Flourish, and you're directly supporting the work that I'm working on. And you can pick up any of my books, including City of Arches, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Companion, and more at the Sly Flourish bookstore, along with our brand new merch, hats, shirts, calendars, cups. You can find all of that in the links to the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.